On the regenerative journey, our goal is to nurture and facilitate the lives and journeys of all our followers, which is why we've teamed up with resource consulting service RCS, Australia's leading provider of education and advisory services in regenerative agriculture. RCS trains and consults across the ag sector, from individuals and families through to corporates and even government, empowering people to grow productive and profitable businesses in diverse and, importantly, healthy landscapes. They understand that the future of healthy families, resilient communities and regenerative farming lies in holistic education. Over the last 15 years, they've played an integral role in my own regenerative journey, and I have a lot to thank RCS for, and I'm one of 7,500 others who have attended their Farming and Grazing for Profit course. I don't know where I'd actually be, and I certainly wouldn't be this far down my own regenerative journey if I hadn't completed a significant amount of training with the RCS team. I can't recommend more highly RCS to anyone looking to start their regenerative journey in a supportive and proven environment. Terry McCosker and your team, you absolutely rock. And we're also absolutely stoked to be collaborating with them now. For my listeners only, we're offering a 10% discount on all farming and grazing for profit schools and grazing clinics in Australia this year. If you add this to the early bird rate of a 7-day school, you could get a whopping $1,000 off the standard price. Simply add the code CharlieRCS, that's CharlieRCS, that's one word, at the checkout to get your concession. How awesome is that? Now head to the show notes to find out more.
You know, I want your children, Charlie, my children, to be proud of the way that we've stewarded land, be proud of the fact that we've been able to do it and be profitable, produce great, clean food and fibre, nutrient-dense food, and left our landscapes in a better shape than when we found them.
That was Bert Glover, and you're listening to The Regenerative Journey. From wherever we are, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia, recognising their continuing connection to this land, its waterways, the stars in the skies since time immemorial. We pay our respects to the elders, knowledge holders, and to all the generations of First Nations peoples who have nurtured their unceded sovereign lands for over 80,000 years and continue to do so today.
G'day, I'm your host Charlie Arnott, an 8th generational Australian regenerative farmer. And in this podcast series, I'll be diving deep and exploring my guests' unique perspectives on the world so you can apply their experience and knowledge to cultivate your own transition to a more regenerative way of life.
Welcome to The Regenerative Journey with your host Charlie Arnott.
G'day, welcome back to The Regenerative Journey, and this week's episode guest is, as you probably just heard, a quote from Bert Glover. Before I bang on about Bert, I just remind you that the RCS Convergence Conference is on in the 16th and 17th of July in Brisbane at the Convention Centre there in the city. And if you want some tickets to see and hear and be part of a wonderful convergence of agriculture and human and planetary health, go to the rcsc2022.com.au website, grab some tickets. I think the early bird might still be on. If not, doesn't matter. They're still very good value, those tickets. And it's been 2 years. The guys at RCS have had it pegged for 2022. No, 2020 it was. And then the COVID just blew that out of the water. So I'm stoked that those guys have put it back on and made the leap of faith to just get on and do it, which I think is what we should all be doing in life at this point in time, given that we're just not seeing much of that stuff on the TV anymore, are we? Which is kind of good. Don't know we needed to see much of it in the first place, because what we were seeing was, I don't know if it was all that, I don't know if it's actually of much value, to be honest. Anyway, that's another whole other story. I'm sure everyone knows my view on that topic. Nonetheless, let's move on. One other topic that's come up, and it keeps on coming up, which is interesting, is the whole thing about electric cars. I think I might have banged on a couple of episodes ago about it. And I think what's sort of come to light and really got me thinking more and more about it is, is the whole, well, I guess renewables, that's certainly part of it, but the push for where we're getting our electricity sources from. We've got solar, got wind, hydro, nuclear. I don't know enough about to even comment on, to be honest. And there's coal and there's gas. And I know a bit about coal and gas because some years ago I had some wind farm developers approached us back in the late 2010s, and no, it was before that, 2009 or something, around there, saying we can save the planet if you put up some turbines. I don't want to bang on too much about that, but in my fight, and it was a fight for a number of years to stop that from happening around me and the community here, I learned a lot about renewables. And a recent message I got, which I really appreciate, by the way, when I posted something recently about, what are we actually doing here when we're running around electric cars? That power's got to come from somewhere. At the moment, most of it comes from coal and gas. There's a portion from wind, which again is a whole nother bag. Government-sponsored fraud, I have to say it out and loud and clear, is wind farms and wind farming. I know enough about it to understand pretty clearly that whole kind of thing. When you consider the rare earth metals in those turbines and the infrastructure required, the concrete, the steel, the nano tubing, basically like a fiberglass for the blades, non-recyclable, diesel burnt to get it all here. A lot of this stuff's made in overseas. Anyway, I won't bang on enough. I don't think, given the audits we've done and the kind of the research we did, that wind farms per turbine actually pay back or offset the carbon emitted in their manufacturing and construction and transport to the point of when they actually start generating power, because they do generate power. There's no doubt about that. But is the carbon offset at all? And if it is it enough in the lifetime of that turbine to actually offset the carbon emitted in its production? Anyway, a bit of homework there for you. I didn't set out to talk about wind farms too much, but anyway, nonetheless, so electric cars, and again, look, I think I'll put wind aside as an effective renewable energy source. Solar, I don't know enough about. As I said, nuclear, is it renewable? In the first place, is it considered there? And hydro is a whole other bag as well. My point being that, and this was a comment that someone made, was, was it right to be bagging the fact that power that's now drawn out of power points and charging stations to charge up electric cars, most of it, I dare say, actually comes from fossil fuels. So are we actually making a difference in that, maybe we should be just supporting electric cars until such time as renewables can take it over? I mean, I don't know if I want to go there about that. I just don't know that I'd like to see more numbers on renewables, to be honest, in terms of a full audit of the environmental, the ecological footprint that they have when they're actually operating, but also when they're, well, there's three parts to it too, isn't it? There's like when they're being manufactured and the construction and the, putting all the pieces, whether it's solar or whether it's turbines or whatever, whatever the renewable energy source componentry and mechanics is. That's reminded me, I'll just mention something. I'm going to finish waffling on about this. And so and then there's, how much carbon is being offset in its lifetime, and then at the end of its life, what's the impact on the environment? Can it be recycled? I know for the turbines, the blades can't be recycled. They have to be maybe overseas, but I don't think we've got any processing plants or facilities in Australia to do it. And they do deteriorate over time. They do break down, and encasing them in concrete is one way to stop that. But that's a whole other environmental issue in itself. So there's three stages that I don't know. I'm not clear. If the numbers are out there, I'd love to see them. I know there are lots of people going, and that's what I got when I was fighting wind farms. Actually, was, well, you must love coal if you don't like wind. It's like, oh, really? And I'd just say to them, well, look, just because I don't love, I don't like Fords doesn't mean I love Holden. It's like I have my choices and my reasons for not liking, in this instance, wind power. Anyway, that's a whole other thing. So look, I'm not against renewables. I am just very cautious as to getting on the bandwagon and say they're going to save the planet and we'll be 100% renewable in 15 years' time, because I don't I don't know. Not that it's not possible. I mean, I'm sure it's possible, but is that actually solving the problem? Are we actually then reducing less carbon if we look at if we audit the whole system from go to woe, from manufacturing, operation, and then end of life kind of stuff. Anyway, nonetheless, that was my point actually. If we all agree or want to kind of sit around the problem of carbon, or we're emitting as a race, on this planet more carbon than is being sequestered, then I guess the maths of it might suggest that there's more carbon in the atmosphere. But the whole idea of trying to offset that mechanically, I mean, let's say it's a biological, physical kind of a problem, if we call it a problem. And it's interesting that we've all sort of, in our techno heads and, in commerce and corporations, we're going, well, how do we fix this with mechanics? Oh, we get the wind or we get the solar and do all these things. I'm not saying it's all bad. I'm just saying, is that really the way forward? I mean, my comment to that would be, I don't believe you can solve a biological problem with mechanics. You might need, and I suggest, doing what we're doing and many other farmers are doing, and people growing trees and anyone who's sequestering carbon. That's a real solution. It's a biological solution. So that's where my head is right now. How do we get onto all of that? Again, I didn't set out to rant on about that. Nonetheless, it's topical. It's interesting. I think it's worth more consideration. I'm certainly not just jumping on the bandwagon going, yep, electric cars are all the go. I did mention previously about, the componentry, sitting in a car with all that rare earth metal, and that's a whole other thing where it's mined and how that impacts the environment. But just the EMFs around sitting in those cars for hours on end. Well, if they can actually go for more than a couple of hours without being charged. There was something else in there as well about electricity, and I don't know. I can't remember now. It doesn't matter. I'm sure it'll come up another time. Let's bang on about Bert Glover now. Bert is a wonderful human being. I used to play rugby with Bert and against Bert down here at Burrawa. He was playing for the Yes Rams. I was playing for the Burrawa Goldies. He played a bit of zone football, and since then he's gone on to wonderful things. And I really fascinated with Bert's story, farming, looking for different answers, looking for a better way to do things, looking at benchmarking on farms, looking to just improve the productivity and the accountability of a farm and the investments one has made in that through a series of events and changes in direction. He's now heading up a wonderful business called Impact Ag Partners, and it's all about natural capital. It's all about realising natural capital and the value and that on farms and working them regeneratively. And running them regeneratively and looking at all the aspects of that, all the natural capital kind of assets, but in the context of a regenerative approach. So we're not just like mining the farms and just extracting capital value out of it. It's about how do we enhance that and value it, and then farmers can actually be essentially paid and for the good work they're doing in a number of ways. You can be the judge of all that. I reckon it's a wonderful business and a wonderful step forward in sort of realisation of the good work that farmers are doing. Enough of me. More of Bert, please. Here he is, Bert Glover, and I trust you enjoy this interview with Bert on the regenerative journey. Bert Glover, welcome to the regenerative journey, and welcome to the second interview I've done in Lisa's cottage here, just over the road from Wilmot. Have you ever been to Lisa's cottage? Maybe I shouldn't ask. Lisa's cottage.
Charlie, no, I haven't been to Lisa's cottage. I've driven past it many a time.
You knew where it was?
Yeah,
right.
This is Little Falls Creek. It's an amazing creek. We just came over, one of three on Wilmot, and Little Falls. It's called Little Falls, and there is actually a little fall downstream, about a K, platypus fish, like beautiful.
Bart mentioned the story about the trout and when he was 5 and everything, which was like straight up, and it was fascinating. Because there's quite a few waterfalls on Wilmot, isn't there? Or a number of them. I don't know.
Three.
Yeah. One's quite amazing, beautiful.
Yeah, it really is.
Is that because it's a waterfall? Strange question maybe. Because, I mean, you always think waterfalls are sort of, usually national parks and open to the public. That's clearly not. That's just a beautiful thing to have on a private property, yeah?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
I hope they don't get people wandering in there going, I've heard about these falls.
We probably should stop talking about it.
Oh, no. Oh, did you think I said waterfalls? No, I said something else. I see. Yeah. Oh, no, I meant gravel pit. That's what I meant.
No, that's fine. And I didn't say thanks for having me, but it's a pleasure,
mate,
Charlie. And,
you just did. That's awesome.
And well done for this initiative. It's really neat someone's sharing all these stories, because that's many people learn from other people's stories.
Well, I mean, it's. I appreciate you saying that. It's because I think I was here. You know, not the last time I saw you, but one of the last times I saw you was at in Armidale, because I was. You know what it was? It was the day after the Maia Grazing workshop field day, which is what is day 2 is today. 2 years ago, and I just interviewed Sarah Schmuder.
Yeah.
That morning, and we met for coffee, I think, down the road.
That's right.
At your office. So that was 2 years ago. And I said, mate, we're going to hit you up for an interview. So it's taken at least 2 years to do that. So here we are. Looking at Stan, who is living in the house next door, I don't think I'm out of line saying that. His horse, I didn't ask him the name of his horse. It's 14 years old, not fine-looking steed. I'm not sure if he wants to be sitting there doing what he's doing right now. If I wouldn't want to be standing there tied up to that post.
Well, if you think about it, though, where else would you rather grow and live if you're a horse than Ebor? I mean, life doesn't get much better. It's kind of it's like being in the salad bowl, isn't it? It's like you're in a buffet.
Yeah.
If you're a horse, mate, this is heaven.
This is heaven. If there's a good tree to shelter under, and you've got Stan giving you a bucket of chaff twice a day, which I saw him do there before, then I think you would be pretty happy. I wish I'd asked him the name of that horse. It's a fine-looking... I don't know if he's got any batteries left in him. Can't quite see that bit, but anyway, we know he's a boy.
Batteries or not, he's in good condition.
He probably doesn't care. He's just having so much fun just being alive here at Ebor. Mate, off the horses, on to you. We are at Ebor, and we'll get to sort of how you got to be here a bit later on, as in this location and so on. Looking out upon, and as I am known to do, Bert, with my guests, is take them to, and this is not where you grew up, but this not this exact view, but certainly this part of the world. It's, I dare I say, it's special to you in some way, shape, or form. But being in nature, looking out at a horse, a beautiful horse, and look like it might be an old orchard or something out there, and green grass of Ebor. What is it sort of? Is that a, I mean, you said the horse should be pretty happy. Are you happy to be here?
Oh, yeah. I love this place. I love this area. You probably know this, but for those listeners that don't, Ebor is one of the regions on the Great Dividing Range up the east coast of Australia that's actually nearly, you'd have to fact check this, but it's nearly the closest point to the eastern seaboard to the coast. And what that means is that we've got good elevation here at about 1,250 metres, and we attract really good precipitation.
As we have seen in the last couple of days, experienced, felt.
I nearly got bogged to coming up the drive. But, to have that rainfall, and then you've got some of the youngest soils in Australia here in Ebor, these red basalts. So you've probably spoke about this with our friend Bart Davidson, but farms in this part of the world are what we call, they're kind of the V8s of farms. This area, these production systems here from an agriculture point of view, they're the V8s.
Highly productive.
Oh, man. And when they go, their 0 to 100 happens very fast.
Well, it's funny you say that, because we had a dinner here at the night before day one at Maia Grazing, the field day, and I've got to be careful of that, Bert, because it fell off before 3 times in the interview. Was it Al or was it Bart? Oh no, Cole Phelan said, one of the guys down there, he said that some of the area here used to grow a lot of potatoes. Dorrigo is famous for potatoes. I didn't know they kind of make sense that they grew them here as well. But he also said that, might have been Bart, he said this is where cattle used to come to die, that the native the traditional native pastures and probably conventional management at that time, the winters are so harsh that, cattle wouldn't do so good up here. If they didn't die, they probably did nothing for the whole winter and then try to make up for it in the spring and the summer and autumn. But you're saying that, I guess, maybe with management and other things, that it's red hot.
Oh, you're exactly right in relation to winter. I mean, the elevation, it is cold in the winter, and in general terms, again, you'd have to fact check this, but it's like a 100-day winter up here. Gets very cold. Young stock, and stock that aren't healthy, they can find it challenging. And we've run a lot of different enterprises at Wilmot over the years, and we've had to adapt that over time. And we learned early on when we bought Wilmot, the farm, that we had to think about our enterprise mix and what was going to work, how we'd manage the winter, and we'll probably get onto that later, but it's changed the whole kind of strategic investment approach for the group, the management of winter. So, but when I go back to talking about this being a V8, when the soils start to warm up, and you come into spring, October, November, it's game on.
Because the rainfall, whilst, like a lot of like Burra or Yass and you're down our way, your old way, they say it's Mediterranean climate. What is that nowadays? But not much growth in winter. But is the rainfall here in winter adequate? And then that's an opportunity to fill up the profile, and then game on. Spring's here. Is that generally what happens?
Well, this is where it's a little bit different to the region you're referring, the Southern Tablelands. This climate here, it doesn't, it might only get 40 mil, 50 mil through those months of June, July, and it's cold, not overly, it's temperature that's limiting. And then if you don't get some early September, October rain as well, you can have a challenging spring here. From a seasonal point of view and a rainfall pattern point of view, February is the wettest month on this farm here. But again, you've got the soils that hopefully, they act like a massive sponge. If you can retain your moisture, you can do some things that are in your control to take out those peaks and troughs. I mean, it does grow here, Charlie, in the middle of winter, but, in old terms, it does about 9 kilos of dry matter per hectare per day. So there's a small amount there. So, it's not going to set the world on fire. It only sort of maintains a minimal stocking rate.
Don't count on it. Yeah. Mate, we'll get back to Wilmot and what's happening here, but give us a bit of a rundown on that this morning. Tell me, Bert, where did, as the name suggests, Regenerative Journey is about, I guess, journeys, and dare I say, I choose yes that I know somewhat of their journey, and it doesn't necessarily have to refer to a farming regenerative type of journey. We interviewed dentists and meditators and all sorts of actresses and things, but there are certainly principles and kind of attitudes, dare I say, and perspectives that are certainly common through that, and there are turning points and there are tension events that sort of are catalysts for change. So we'll get to those. But where do you want to start your journey, Bert? Do you want to, born at somewhere to this and doing that as a child? I mean, you can start anywhere, man.
Okay, mate. That's probably a good place to start. It is a journey, isn't it? So, born and raised on a family primarily fine wool merino sheep farm in southern New South Wales at Yass, and I grew up just following my dad around, wearing his old hat, boots that were too big. I was the youngest of 4, and I was just in his shadow. And, he would say that I had sheep shit on the brain from the get-go. And so I was always going to be a farmer, Charlie. I went away to boarding school. School and I, we didn't get along so good. And so I spent my early years, and here we are looking at this horse out here, not so happy.
What's going on down the paddock there?
I grew up, my dad loved to ride horses. I really got into horses as well. We, back in those days, we did all our sheep work on horses. We'd always find a great flat paddock to have a race at the end of the day. My two brothers and sister, they rode a horse because there was a job to be done, but they weren't all that passionate about it. But it was one of my passions, and that probably, I got interested in horse sports, and I kind of made up my mind that when I finished boarding school, I was heading to the Northern Territory and I wanted to ride horses, chase cattle, and experience what it's like to be a ringer in the top end. So
ringer from the top end.
That's it.
Where'd you end up there? What station you up there?
So I worked for a consolidated pastoral company, and at that time they had, assets right across Queensland, Northern Territory and into WA. They'd just bought Carlton Hill near Kununurra.
Did you get up there?
Yeah. I was really lucky in terms of an experience. So it started out, the stock camp I was involved in, we were like a travelling stock camp. So we would meet in Queensland. We'd have all our horses would be there, the trucks would be there, and we would do, we'd go to a fattening place in Queensland, help with mustering as soon as it was dry enough. We'd then pack everything up, take all our horses, all their gear, head west. We'd do a round at Newcastle Waters on one of those areas. I mean, there was a permanent camp there, but they needed help. We'd go there, then we'd do another little place called Dungown in the Tanami. We were responsible for all those cattle, so we'd do that. Then we'd head to Humbert River, which was kind of our base. We were called the Humbert River Stock Camp. We'd go there, and it's crazy when you look back at it. We there. My head stockman at the time, he was 21.
What were you? What age were you?
I had my 18th birthday in the Blue Heeler Hotel in Kainoona.
Oh, yeah.
So I just turned 18.
Have you got a stubby coaster from back then?
I haven't, but
I've got one from some. I've got one. I don't know where the hell it is, of course, but I've got one there.
Let's just say it's the first and the last time I drank bourbon.
What happened? What happened in between?
Oh, jeez.
So what year are we talking?
We're talking 1993.
Yeah, right. Okay.
So we'd go to Humbert River. That was our base. We'd had to spend, a couple of months fixing floodgates. We'd muster, have to knock the place back into shape. Humbert River's just behind VRD's. Bit of a goat track to get there. Bit of isolation there. And then we'd go across to Carlton Hill and help out there, and they were opening up as well. So part of Carlton Hills is probably called Ivanhoe. Oh, yeah. Still a lot of sort of shorthorn cross cattle.
Was it Bradley, Richard Bradley at the time? Yeah, that's right.
Yep, I think they were actually still living in the big house when we took over.
Well, I know they were there in 94, because I was up there. A mate of mine was. I was telling you about that Brokeback Mountain story before.
You can't put that on a podcast.
I don't know if I did. Well, the horse and the whole, the guy had to devolve. No, it's not as bad as it sounds. Not that that's bad. It's just, anyway, that's what it was. Anyway, that same good mate, he was looking after, he was at the Ord River with Pack Seeds, Pacific Seeds up there. And we went up, mate and I went up there to help him, detassel corn and, do all that stuff as you do, and rogue sorghum and all that sort of caper. And so we went, and his girlfriend at the time she was the station cook at Carlton Hill.
Oh, right.
So I went out there, and they were buddies with the Paspalis and all that sort of stuff. So anyway, so I guess I'm getting a little time reference for myself there. So beautiful part of the world, isn't it?
Beautiful part of the world. And it was in the early days, like I think it was 100 k's from the homestead to the coast, and there was no cattle yards out there. It was early days, and this is the 90s. And I remember we did this muster, Charlie, and we were about 50 k's from the Lakina, and I remember saying to the head stockman, "What's this muster about?" He said, "This morning at 4, 3 helicopters went to the coast, and they're going to be here in probably about half an hour. They've been flying for 3 hours, and they're going to have a big mob of shorthorn cattle that haven't seen a human before." And I went, right. And then we get there, and we sort of set a strategy on how we're going to try and wrangle these things. And the spear grass, even when you're on your horse, is still 6 feet high. So, all you see is the spear grass coming to get blade over when the cattle are
coming towards you.
And you can hear the chopper behind them. And ones that break out, you know, in those days with Bruce Losis, it was just bang, bang, bang. They're just shooting things. And anyway, I think they started with something like, I don't know, it was only 400 head. I think we yarded like 100.
Fair dinkum.
Yeah.
Jesus. And that took all day, no doubt.
Oh, yeah. But it's a great education, and, you know, makes you think a bit of life preservation comes in every now and then.
Well, I guess, I mean, I kind of appreciate WHS and safety and all that sort of kind of stuff. That's kind of, you know, in some ways sensible. But at the same time, I don't know, the more we have decisions made for us and kind of, you know, that, I mean, the less we get to experience and actually, I might get out of the way of that thing, you know. I haven't got a helmet on and I'm not necessarily equipped with a 2A radio, but I'm, you know, your own personal safety and responsibility, I think, is not necessarily as important as it is now. You know what I mean?
Well, a little bit.
Did you have 2As on you? Or
No, we had nothing like that. But the thing is, you know, the way risk back then was managed, Charlie, was real about recruitment. So it was like, what's your background? What's your experience? What's your attitude? Like, you know, those companies, they wouldn't hire someone that was going to be a liability or make irrational decisions. They weren't going to hire someone that couldn't, you know, spend good hours on a horse and understand how livestock work, you know. So and you know what, with all the training and everything that we've got in place today, I mean, you know, we've got assets all across Australia and assets in the US. You still got experience, common sense,
intuition, and just I always forget the bloody word, not intuition, initiative. Initiative.
Yeah. So anyway, we better get back on track here. So and then we'd turn around from Carlton Hill and we'd do all those rounds all the way back to Newcastle Waters. By then we'd do that. It's October, November, time to go home for the wet season. So I did that for 2 years, working up there, and it was, you know, if nothing else, I learnt to work. Big days, not a lot of time off. If you did have time off, it was at a rodeo. So you were riding in the rodeo and then load the truck, back out. You mightn't see, you know, you mightn't go back to town for 8 weeks, 6 weeks to the next camp draft and rodeo. But you learn to work and you learn to get along with people. You know, you're in with 8 or 10 people and you got to get along.
You know, no doubt know Stu's story, well, some of it I imagine, of his time up there and his kind of epiphanies he had and things that, you know, stood out to him. What did you, so 2 years, and what sort of got you out of there end of year 2?
I couldn't really see a career that was going to satisfy my ambitions. It was great. I learned to work. I learned a lot. I made some good connections, some good friends. Learned a lot about myself. But for me, I didn't think it was going to really advance a career that I'd be proud of.
What did you learn about yourself up there?
You know, I learned pretty early on that, you know, put in some situations I can, you know, like any young guy, I can be a smart ass and get a bit full of myself like all of us. And that's one of the reasons why you go there, you know, like it doesn't hurt you to, you know, get a clip under the ear every now and then and put you back in the line and to get along with other people and how to behave. And, you know, it was a part of a growing up experience. I guess I'm not saying I walked away and I was a new human. I mean, I didn't really know what I wanted to do in my life till I was 30, but that played a big part in it. And I needed to get away from, you know, school. I need to get away from my comfort zone. I need to be put out of my comfort zone to kind of get to that, to get some rounding, I think, and become a better human, some more humility.
Did you have these thoughts at the time? Like, were you, like, you know, I'm not being taken the piss or anything, but like, you know, was there like reflection going, I need to be, you know, more humble or need to develop more? Or is it kind of just you sort of, on reflection, it was just a subconscious kind of a urge? Were you reading books? Like I know that Stu read, you know?
No, I wasn't. You know, I didn't get passionate really about reading till I really started thinking about mentors and business people that that I really idolised. I'm not really into fiction. I'm into fact-based information and biographies and people's stories. That's what really ticks me. And so I came to these realisations later on reflection, Charlie, and you try and think about what's contributed to the person you are, I think, today. It's nothing like a podcast like this when someone says, I want you to talk about your journey, and you reflect on it. And I've had a couple of days to reflect on it, and it's like, it's actually really good for the soul to reflect on who you are, how you got here, you know, what you believe, what your purpose is. So if nothing else, you know, thanks for making me reflect for a couple of days.
I should have just asked you this morning, hey, Bert, just pop down and have a
You'd have put me in a spin then, I tell you.
Well, Bart had some similar but as he's prone to do, overthink things, and that's his words as well. But that's really nice to hear. I haven't sort of kind of thought of it that way. That this process is a prompting kind of a situation for my guest. So that's kind of, at least that must be a good thing then.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's really good. And so to sort of build on, I guess, on that journey, came home from 2 years working in the Northern Territory, and you know, I didn't really grow physically as a human until I got home. I mean, you work so hard, you are going 100%. You know, it wasn't till 12 months later I realised, you know, I've actually put on 6 kilos now, and I haven't got an ounce of fat on me, but I've been able to actually grow. I've got probably a bit better nutrition, bit more fresh food.
When you went home? When
I finally got, you know, looking back. So got home, and then I thought, righto, I've got some more exploring to do here. And part of that exploring was I thought, you know, my roots historically were in the sheep business. So I went and worked at a couple of larger sheep studs in New South Wales just to try something different.
Any that you care to name?
So one was at a place called Wooloora next door to Bunnock down at Conago.
Okay, yep.
It's about 110,000 acres. Well, it was then. This is in 95.
So we're talking Riverina.
Talking to Riverina, yeah.
Yep.
And it was a great place to work. Great old guy that owned it, a guy called Bill Lamb. And, you know, those are the days, Charlie, where, you know, he'd go to town and he had his black top hat and his waistcoat and he'd go once a week to town. And,
shit.
And it was just for us young guys to see him do that. It was kind of like...
What was the name of that place again?
Wooloora. Don't know. Willura.
That's cool.
Yep. And they just grew big Riverina, heavy cutting, medium strong merino sheep. And it was great. It was very much a commercial operation, but it had a stud as well. And anyway, part of my learning journey. And then I spent another 6 months at a stud at Warren called Eagelabra.
Oh, yeah.
Owned by the Catter family. And
so it was that was in 90...
That was early 96.
So it was Hugh
Lydiard. Yep,
yeah.
he was the manager.
Yeah.
Yep. And another neat guy was the overseer, a guy called Paul Kelly, who's such a character. But, you know, we all played footy together in Warren and used to play against Burke and Cobar and all those places and bus trips, and that was fun. So we...
So what is it? The Warren? What are the Warren Watts? Rams? Pumas.
Black and white, just like the Ashman.
That's right. He couldn't get away from it because they are the other Rams. I haven't even thought of that because I was talking to a fellow up at Walgett the other day, Nick Mace, and he says there's other Rams up there. There's like the Walgett Rams, and there's not the Walgett. Walgett, and there's 3 Rams up there.
Oh, wow.
Rams teams.
No, well, we were the Pumas.
Because that was the sheep
Warren.
thing, you know.
Pumas. It was, yeah. We were great. And this overseer, guy called Paul Kelly, played hooker, and he wasn't happy unless he got stitches after every game. It was fun. If things were going not good for us, Paul would just start swinging at someone. Just
to turn it up.
But a great guy. I learned quite a bit from Paul. He's a neat guy. So we're at 1996. Then it was kind of, I finally got the call from the folks, you know, I think it's time to think about coming home and helping out a bit. And, you know, which was really great because I'd kind of, I think, got that on my system at that point in time. And came home and I think, as part of this journey, it's always interesting when you go home and your parents are still there and they're in charge of the farm and you've been out and you've got some confidence and it's really interesting to start thinking about the management of a farm, business management, succession, finance, performance. So, it's probably the first time, and you've got to remember too, I guess my parents, so this is in the mid-90s, agriculture for them growing up, it was a business, but it was also a bit of a lifestyle. And their formative years, if you go back for them, their formative years is the 50s and 60s. Well, if you're in the wool industry in the 1950s and you're getting £1 a pound, life's pretty good. And so when the economics and then you change, and in the wool industry you get there was the pricing, the wool price. What was that?
The floor price.
The floor price.
Floor price. Yeah,
put together by WB or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And so anyway, economics change, things change. Our family farm, we were looking at expanding and my folks bought some more dirt and we were leasing and, we were going quite well. And one thing that, I was really proud of my folks is because, they didn't ever really have a leader or a business coach or anyone. And they sort of went out and decided to participate in a farm benchmarking group. And this farm benchmarking group was made up of about 20 family farmers primarily within a 200k radius from where we were, so from kind of Goulburn to, let's say, Jugeong or whatever. And I think the group was facilitated by an accountancy firm and ag consultancy firm, put these people together and you would submit all of your financial data, production data. And for a young guy like me, it really had quite an impact on me in terms of looking at numbers different, looking at what drives production and then the relationship between production and financial performance. And it was something that probably had quite an influence on me in understanding the value of data, number one. Number two, the business side of agriculture. So it was probably the first time for me that when I started looking at, our performance, our profitability, how productive we were, return on equity, our gearing levels, how we manage debt. Because, we were we're trying to grow, we're trying to expand, we're going to take on, where can we get cheap capital? So had a real influence on me and I used to just look at this data and what was really cool about the process that these guys had put together, Charlie, was every quarter you'd go to someone's farm and everyone got really comfortable with each other knowing their information and data. And it got to a point where I knew how much debt you had. You knew how much debt I had. You knew if I was going through succession challenges. You knew who was having a divorce. We became quite a well-connected group, but every quarter we'd go to each other's farm and they'd do a presentation on their numbers and we'd have a little farm tour and you could ask as many questions as you like. And then the real kicker for me was when once a year we'd get together, all of us, and it was facilitated and they would talk about the year in review and who were in the top 20% for any given kind of metric, and it might be beef produced, cost of production of beef, might be cost of production of clean wool, might be return on equity, might be just on
kilos of beef per hectare.
You got it.
Yeah. So it was I guess essentially a benchmarking group program set up. Who was running that?
So it was Holmes and Sackett. It was Holmes and Sackett together with Boyce & Co.
Yeah, right. And was that their first pilot of that, or they've been doing it elsewhere?
I think that they had other groups. So there was one going down the Monero at the time, and there was a couple other groups around. And we would actually, I think they used to put everyone's data from all around New South Wales that were in these things every now and then.
Yep.
But for me, the reason why those annual events were great is that they would say, okay, the 5 businesses that were in the top 20% for return on assets, or the top 5 businesses for cost of production per kilo of beef, please come up the front. And those 5 would go up the front. And you could ask any question you wanted. They would share how they got their cost of production so high.
Yep.
And just simple things like, were you focusing more on cost, or were you focusing more on production to get a good outcome of cost of production? Or your return on asset, how are you driving your system with the balance sheet and the assets you had at your disposal? So for me, by this time I'm, 25, 26. It was an eye-opener for me, but I used to get that data and I used to look at it and stew on it on the weeks before it and analyse it and think about it.
Had you been a data numbers person before that? Like, was that something at school you're a maths nerd or anything?
No. At school, no. And it was only because it was related to agriculture.
Yeah.
It's the only reason why.
It was relevant.
It was relevant to me, and it was relevant because, how could my family and I, because it was quite interesting for us as a business, depending on what was going on, we were in and out of the top 5% quite a bit. And it's like, how are we going to get this business so that we're up there and stay there? So anyway, that was that. And the reason I bring that up is that it was all about economic performance and production performance. And it helped me realise the importance of data. And when we're talking about a regenerative journey, not once were we talking about back then in the 90s on soil organic carbon, biodiversity metrics, team engagement, social engagement. We didn't have those. But I think for me, I got to understand what drove really good financial performance. And I think as my career progressed from that point in time, I would question some of the performance that we were all experiencing in years of drought. So how were our assets faring in the challenging times in relation to our financial performance? There was no environmental metrics, which, this is the 90s. That was not going to happen. Different point in time. That's fine. But for me, it was a way that I felt when Impact Ag started to really get tracking, we were going to be dogged about metrics relating to their environment and social impact. And so one of the first things when we started really reporting to our investors, it was going to be impact reporting, and we were going to hoover whatever information and data we felt was going to be relevant to demonstrate what we were doing in addition to financial performance.
Clearly, and that's what a lot of yesterday's talks at day one here was about. Not specifically. It was the ecology, the importance of ecology as a driving force for economics. We didn't to drill down all the numbers, and if you do this, you're going to get X dollars per hectare or whatever. But it was more the importance of the asset, or the value of the asset, and the performance of the asset, and I guess which at any one point in time you can measure, and there's lots of variables, of course, but it was about how can we actually improve that. To be the driving force, the goose that's laying the golden eggs. How can we fatten it up? How can we, give it some buddies? How can we, what sort of feed do we need to give it to keep it, ever or regenerating, and which is, I guess, addressing degradation in some ways, but just a general generation of biology, soil health, all those wonderful things. So, and again, I guess back then, the numbers you're looking at were financial, which was pretty important. Did you ever at any point then go, I wonder what our soil's doing? Or
no, not in the sort of context that you and I think about it today. But I think, like you and your family farm, soil test and soil health was all about the impact it had on plant production and then the financial outcomes of that plant production. So it was in the context of production. So we were testing soil and doing all these other things, but it was like more about what's the problem we were trying to fix so we could grow X or perform better with Y, as opposed to how are my soils, how can I improve the overall health of my soil. There was none of that thinking back then.
Looking for more information to assist your regenerative journey? Come join Charlie and his guests around the kitchen table, an online community of supporters with exclusive access to the Regenerative Journey interview transcripts, live online Q&A sessions, a chance to engage with other like-minded people and more. Go to www.charliearnott.com.au/the kitchen table, and we look forward to sharing a yarn with you. Now let's get back to this week's episode.
So benchmarking, family farm, I guess happy?
Happy. Yep. Thinking about the next challenge. Actually, at home and looking at that horse reminds me 1999 was really lucky. Went to the US for 3 months and worked with a guy. I know you like to talk about mentors sometime, a guy who was kind of unofficial, the kind of first horse whisperer, a guy called Ray Hunt, who was amazing with horses. And a friend of mine and we flew to Colorado Springs. We did a horse clinic, so starting young horses. He'd been to Australia. We'd kind of known him. We went over there to do some intense horse clinics. We went to Colorado Springs, did a clinic, and at the end of the clinic he came up and goes, "You two Aussies want to come work with me for a while?" And we just went, "Hell yeah."
Did you know the other Aussie, or did you just turn up?
Yeah. No, a mate of mine I worked in the territory.
Yep, cool.
So that was just amazing, this guy that we'd idolised, and it was all about natural horsemanship. And Ray Hunt is a guy who doesn't care too much for humans, but he cares a lot about horses. So there could be for some participants in those clinics, there was a baptism of fire because, if you were doing the wrong thing by the horse or weren't giving the horse the opportunities he felt that the horse could have, well, you'd get the wrath of Ray Hunt. Yeah. And there was plenty of people that went out with their jaw on the ground and, that wasn't for them. But he was all about the horse, and he was great for us. And he was amazing. We had a lot of fun with him. We travelled and stayed with him a lot, did all these clinics. Because he had one lung at that time, he's 70. We were on all these young horses for him. We learned so much, and he was a good human about being humble. I don't know if you've ever heard the poem, "The Man in the Glass."
No.
It's a cracking poem. If you ever get to read it, I'll forget it, but it goes something like, when you get, I can't remember it now. It's like, and the world makes you king for a day. Go to the mirror and look at yourself and see what the man has to say. It isn't your mother or father or wife whose judgment upon you must pass, whose verdict will count most in your life is the one staring back in the glass. So,
wow.
But it goes on for, I can't quite.
Did he write that? No.
No, he didn't.
Something that
he didn't, but he used to sit there on his horse.
Quote it.
At these horse clinics and quote it. And it's all about you. Don't bring your baggage. Don't try and blame anyone else. Go and have a look in the mirror. Sort your life out. So great for me to, again, humbling experience. Really kind of good timing for me, and I really enjoyed it. Learned a lot. Had some fun. Fell in love with North America. And then so in terms of journey, that's 1999. Then started thinking about the next challenge. Started to get involved with big farm down at Cavan, a farm called Cavan Station at Yass. Started to do some work there. Had a small contracting business to make a bit extra cash.
Mustering and so.
Mustering and, back then lamb marking and weaning and calf marking, and had a little team, a little posse of guys that used to work for me and doing a few different things.
When you just back a step, you said looking for the next challenge. Was that actually how you looked at it? Or you were reflecting on saying they are challenges as you sort of, change your life and things come up? Or were you actually searching for, I need to kind of push my boundaries a bit?
Yeah. I had some inner ambition that I wanted to, expectations on myself, I guess. So, and I kind of was looking for the next thing to get my teeth into, I guess. So started working more and more at Cavan Station. It grew a lot in 2000. It doubled in size. And yeah, that's kind of when I got into some senior management positions in managing a bunch of people. We had a sheep stud there that we developed, did a lot of AI. And it was a big commercial beast and challenging geography to manage. So yeah, I was there for quite a bit. And then in terms of the journey, I think, and this is kind of, you will probably say in some of your podcasts, was there a point in time that really turned things around in your journey? So I think in 2005, 2006, in that part of the world, there was a major drought and it was a shocker. We lost those production systems, as you know, really rely on that spring growth from a pasture point of view. Anyway, we missed the spring 2005. And it was 2005, 2006 were really influential years in my life because 2005, I got married. My wife, from Vancouver, Canada, she came over. We'd met. We got married in 2005. We had our first son. No, go back a bit. My dad died of cancer in December 2005. Then my grandmother died 6 weeks later. And then my son was born 4 weeks later. So this is early 2006. And when you get slapped in the face with death and seeing loved ones die, I think, again, that was a turning point for me to say, I think the question I ask myself is, what would I be proud of when I get put in a pine box? And then you start thinking about what would my children be proud of and what legacy will I leave my children? So that all happened around that time. And so we still had my mother on our family farm. I was working at Cavan. So kind of juggling, what are we going to do with these assets? We had some plans around what we're going to do with the assets, but it needed execution. And at the same time, we're in the middle of this bad drought. I'm working at Cavan. We go into early 2006 and the manager at the time, the drought wasn't being managed very well and the manager gets fired.
Because of the condition of the farm and just not managed well?
Yeah, I think it was probably more that there wasn't a plan for the future. Yeah. So not only the externalities were there for everyone, how it had been managed to that point in time, I think that was the family down there weren't comfortable with, owned by a family that a kind of investor that looking in saying, I'm not sure this is quite right. Mm-hmm. And wasn't a real plan for the future. So it was kind of like, something's got to change. And that's when, my relationship with Alistair McLeod starts. He's part of the family, based in Australia. His job to fix it. He rings. I was at a point in time in my life where I was like, I'm not sure this environment's quite for me. Mm. I was quite comfortable to look for the next challenge. I was actually on holidays in Coffs Harbour and Alistair rang me and said, I've just fired the manager. Can you fly home tonight and I need you to settle the ship? And
You see, you were working full-time there at that point? You were like overseer or...
Yeah, I was like 2 IC in a challenging environment. And, you know, just it was a good example of probably at the time the in-farm gate community. You can imagine the stress associated with drought. And then there was, you know, the team wasn't as cohesive as they are today. And lots had to change. And I'd kind of decided, and I'd had a couple of opportunities brought to me to move on. And so I'd kind of made the call to move on. And then Alistair rang and said, you better come back.
Was that call to get, you're on holiday, he knew you were on holiday.
Yeah.
And to get you to essentially get home that day, was that a test, do you think? Because, I mean, he could have said, give me 2 more days, like, you know, the world's not going to go to the shit in 2 days, but...
I don't think it was a test. It was...
He needed to sort it out.
He needed to sort it out, and he knew my style. I know now and known his wife, like, for quite a while. So he knew that I'd do the right thing. He knew I'd come back and help. He knew that I knew...
Could depend on you.
He knew that I knew the situation really well and that something had to change as well.
He was opening a door for you. I mean, which he probably sensed, knowing now, he probably sensed that was, well, certainly an opportunity that you may have thought of, but, you know, when situations are what they are, I mean, to have that door open for you, that was a good thing.
Oh, yeah, so I just turned 30 and I was the second youngest on the staff, and it was like, Alistair's like, right, you and I together, we're going to turn this business around. And we both learn a lot from each other in those early years. It was like, what do we want to do and what do we not want to do? Well, we knew we didn't want to be where we'd been. We weren't going to manage drought like that again. We weren't going to see a landscape like that again. Our assets could not be like that again. The balance sheet couldn't handle this anymore. And our people, we really needed to start thinking about how we're going to take people on a different journey. We didn't know what the journey was going to be, by the way. We had to do a lot of exploring. And that meant, you know, he and I spending a week up at, we did that sustainable agriculture course, Graham Sate.
Up at
we did that.
Rocky or Yeppoon or something, isn't it? Yep. Nambour. Kevin Rudd's electorate. Why was that significant? That was like Kevin 07.
I just remember every morning going to this course talking about Kev's electorate. So, you know, Alistair came from a business background, a media background. I came from an agricultural background. It was kind of a neat mix in that I had the execution skills, he had the business skills. Between us, if we could work out what the right principles and practice were going to be, we could do something really cool. So we went, you know, we had Graham Ward come and talk to us. We went, you know, down to the Coghlan's and Albury. You know, we had David Marsh come over. We were just exploring what are other people doing. Went to the Malone Institute. What's some other ways of going about this? And, you know, that was really interesting. And then whilst we're trying to fix that farm up, we were in this position and we had some pretty substantial feed bills for livestock. And I was there one day and I'd done this feed budget and I said, the amount of money I'm going to ask the family here to put in, I could buy another farm. And this is like 2007. 2007. And it was like, well, if you're going to buy another farm, where would you buy it? And so if you open a clean slate and a map, I ended up with a map with 3 circles. One had a circle around Walker, one had a circle around Ben Lomond, and one had a circle around Ebor. And come, I think, November 2007, we ended up in Ebor.
Now, why Ben Lomond, Walker and Ebor?
Soil and rainfall.
And was that a calculation you kind of...
it was a counter-cyclical rainfall pattern to what we had in southern New South Wales. So It was strategic. And back then I was thinking that those two farms were going to interact with livestock production and maybe even labour and blah, blah, blah. But, in all realities, they're too far apart. That was never really going to work in hindsight. I mean, I think we did a couple of cattle. We've done some cattle trades between the two, but it was about – but when you think about it as a group and financial performance and whatnot, even having counter-cyclical climatic and different growing conditions and seasons, it still made some really good sense. So I think by April 2008, this place wasn't, Wilmot wasn't even on the market officially. I remember Alistair was getting on a plane to go to New Zealand, and we'd done the deal one Friday afternoon with the owner.
Did you tap someone on the shoulder? Or if it wasn't on the market, did you say, this is a good spot?
No, we found this real estate agent, and he said, I do know of this place that sounds like what you want. He said, it's not officially on the market, but I think if the right people came along, he'd consider it. So this real estate agent made the call to the owner, and he had some pretty lofty expectations, and I got a independent val done on it. And I said, look, we'll pay the val. And we got a deal done.
Yeah, nice. Did you move up here? No, you stayed down there.
No, I used to come here once a month and Alistair was still working full time in Sydney by that time. So Alistair would fly up on the weekends. We'd come up once a month.
So you were kind of not overseeing, but you were managing from afar.
Yeah, I was the general manager. We had a manager on the farm, and we had teams here. Back then, it was a bullock trading business. Back then. So yeah, and I guess in terms of my journey, I mean, a great learning experience here with this farm, a great lab to try things, and in terms of the journey that we were on around how we're going to do things different, it took us 2 or 3 years to realise what we did and didn't want to do here and what we wanted to achieve. So in terms of getting into more regenerative types of practices, we had to change some key staff just to get the right team on board, to come on the journey with us. So we had to do that after a few years. But in terms of my journey, this was definitely a part of it, and this farm Wilmot, and the whole Wilmot story is probably a story best left for someone like Stu or whatnot, where we've made more acquisitions to fit strategically into the long-term investment strategy. So Impact Ag Partners has been very much involved in that, but Stu's probably a better one to elaborate more on that. I think for me, though, in my journey, it just really made me realise that investors need trusted, professional business partners for investments in real assets in agriculture. And if the future, in playing a role, when I look now, we believe the role that agriculture can play in decarbonising the atmosphere, producing clean food and fibre, all the things that you and I are passionate about. People that can come and manage capital, managing investments is going to be in high demand. And so for us, that was the catalyst to really put some capital and some investment into Impact Ag and really try and catalyse that. And, first couple of years, we had a lot of red ink on our P&L because we hired a lot of people and, like any starting business, but it wasn't long, 18 months, 2 years. We're profitable and we're out running around the world trying to raise capital.
So that sort of journey from overseeing at Cavan, there have been some challenges, you meeting those challenges with Al, and then there's kind of some extra more thinking and the acquisition of Wilmot. I mean, that was a good grounding, like a test program for Impact Ag, I guess. It was like, well, let's analyse the situation, let's pinpoint a spot and think about why and how and where. Dollars involved. When did Impact Ag start officially? And when did you come up here when it did? Is that because that the sort of...
Well, our first cut of Impact Ag was, the first business was Ag Investments Management, and that was still whilst we were down in Yass in southern New South Wales, and we had, I think, probably 5 clients, 5 investors that we were managing assets for. And then when we moved up here in 2013 to Armidale, we rebranded, really hunkered down on this, and we'd kind of been involved with some investors in fixing up other investors' problems and starting to raise some external money when Impact Ag really got going in Armidale, and we put the right people in the right seats in the business. We could then, and it just then enabled us to really go out and market ourselves, and that's when we started going to Europe and the US and demonstrating that we had an offering for investors through separate managed accounts, direct investments into real assets in Australia that were managed in a way that under regenerative principles, and we were really focused on those impact investors that were really keen to see change, and that's kind of when we really started to get traction. Yeah.
And were you going out and did you had to hunt for that, or was there kind of a nice sort of you were looking for it, other people were looking for it too, and then you sort of or was it a real slog to sort of dig up those people looking to invest in ag, whether that be overseas or Australian investors?
Raising capital, as you know, it's never easy. We had some people have come to us. It's amazing. Some people watch what you do. We invested in some assets last year, and that discussion went for 24 months. Someone saw me talk in New York. We met again in San Francisco 6 months later, a few more Zoom calls, and then, we deployed some capital for them in Australia last year. So it's never easy. A lot of it is referral and word of mouth. And then the other is, when we go to conferences around the world, talk about agriculture as an impact investment. We talk about agriculture as a solution to climate change. We talk about why we believe that investing in ag can be a solution to not only the impacts of climate change, but also something we can do, a solution for future generations, a solution for our children and our grandchildren, so that they can see that we are producing clean food and fibre for them, and they can see a pathway of, I want your children, Charlie, my children, to be proud of the way that we've stewarded land, be proud of the fact that we've been able to do it and be profitable, produce great, clean food and fibre, nutrient-dense food, and left our landscapes in a better shape than when we found them. And I'm hoping, part of our strategy at Impact Ag is around what we call creating a ripple effect to catalyze change. So whether we're in the wheat belt of Western Australia or if we're in Montana, USA, I'd like to think that we can do some things on farms there that engage the local community. We can advocate for what we're doing, demonstrate change and performance, and demonstrate profitable ways of producing clean, nutrient-dense food and building a rich environment, that we create a ripple effect in those communities that drive a level of change. So Impact Ag Partners, we could go and buy 200 acres somewhere and have intense impact, layering, enterprise stacking. We could go to the northern part of Australia and buy 1 million acres and have some impact up there. But for us, we want to be able to influence land managers and land stewards globally. And I think to do that, we need to be pioneers in demonstrating change and regeneration and how to do it profitably, how to do it, by generating natural capital, building landscapes, producing, nutrient-dense food. And if you do those things, what we're really, in the short term, what we're really focused on is premiumising these things that these co-benefits. So can you premiumise biodiversity? In addition to carbon credits, what else can go with that? Well, a carbon credit can come with, some animal welfare pieces, some biodiversity improvements. What's going to make our carbon credit better than the next one? So for us, we want to be demonstrators. We want to be able to show other producers, other ranchers, some different ways of doing things, and hopefully that has a positive impact. And if those all things come to fruition, Charlie, then when they put me in the pine box, I'll be happy.
And so will everyone, I think, Bert, because the model of outside investment into agriculture to have a positive outcome generally revolves around, and traditionally is around profit, isn't it? It's like, I want to invest, I've got the capital gain and of the farm, of the property, and then there's obviously the, what am I getting out of it every year? And that's there's plenty of people still doing it, and that's not good or bad. I'm just saying that's it. But the model you guys have created has got much more depth to it, hasn't it? I mean, it's okay. There's the bottom line. I mean, your balance sheet now has much more on it in theoretical terms, I guess, than just what's in the bank and what's in the paddock and that sort of thing. So let's jump into. You mentioned it a couple of times there. Natural capital, just for everyone's benefit. How do you define it? What is it?
Well, for us, natural capital is all the things we can identify in nature. So to break it down, we think about water, we think about air, we think about soil, we think about plants. That's kind of natural capital for us. That's how we think about it. So it's a broad term, natural capital, isn't it? So, but for us, it's all the fantastic things that nature creates, and we've got to do our best here to enhance it, improve it, nurture it, and it forms a big part of how you just framing up that piece about investment. It's a big part of our what we call our impact reporting now. There can be externalities that impact elements of your performance on a farm, financial performance. But if you can demonstrate, and now that, one of our key metrics, soil carbon, if you can demonstrate that you may have had a big drought, but guess what? Your soil health, your carbon bank in your soils, we haven't lost any of that, or we haven't depleted any of that. We haven't drawn on any of that capital in our soil. It's there, and in some cases we've enhanced it. So there could be externalities that impact our profitability, but a key indicator of our soil health, our proxy for soil health, this thing called soil carbon, it's maintaining or improving. So they're the sorts of things we're proud of. We're proud of our biodiversity numbers, how we're leaving our landscape. So, and then, there is plenty of other years that we have good profitability, and you still want to make sure that you're not, in those good profitable years, you're not drawing down on your natural capital either. It's about, we call it a balanced scorecard. You've got to have a balanced scorecard. So what's our social metrics for the year? What's our environmental metrics for the year? And what's our financial metrics for the year? So that scorecard has got to be balanced. And for us, that's kind of, I guess, one of our points of difference. And that resonates, back to your point, Charlie, probably closer to private capital as opposed to institutional capital that probably, regenerative ag hasn't quite got enough runs on the board yet for large amounts of institutional capital yet. There is indicators, and there is people that have raised small amounts, not small, but reasonable amounts of money from institutions, and I kind of feel like they're bits of pilot capital just to see where this organic regenerative thing goes, and if that capital is at risk or not. And I think more and more of those demonstrators. What
happened then? Just stopped. Hang on. Went black, and then maybe it's running out of herbs. Yeah, keep going. Sorry, mate.
No, you're right. So I think, we're all got to, it's going to take time. We've got to measure stuff. We've got to demonstrate performance, and you need information and data to do that. So, going back to early on, why those benchmarking groups are important. It's really hard to make decisions, big decisions, life-changing decisions, investment decisions, if you haven't got a track record of data and you can't back that up. So, yeah.
Social metrics. Talk to me about that. How do you measure? What does that mean exactly? And what are we trying to track and how? How do you do that?
Yeah. So we view it in two areas. So social metrics within the farm gate, how the people inside this business, and we do that through survey. Mm-hmm. Might be annually, might be quarterly. We survey the team inside.
Is it like a ticker box? Is it like
No, well,
no.
There's questions, and there's questions that we ask all the team to participate in, mm-hmm. and it's anonymous.
Yeah, cool.
So no one knows who's sending him what, and you come up with what we call a internal engagement score, and then we measure other things and how we there's no rule. There's no playbook for this. We've had to make this up on the run. Mm. So outside the farm gate, we look at things like hours donated, so time donated in the community. Might be capital donated into the community through donations. It could be time spent, talking and sharing our story or volunteering, all those sorts of things, because it's not all about just going making donations of cash for a local thing. You've got to, in my mind, time is the real metric of life, time.
How you invest that time.
Yep. Some people may think that money is the currency of life. For me, time is the currency of life. And so I think spending time in communities, contributing to communities, trying to understand the communities you work in, that's really interesting. I learn so much all the time about people. It's fascinating. It's fascinating in going into new communities when you've just purchased an asset and you're the new firm that's come into a community. It's very interesting.
Do you get, and in some ways it's probably it's a filter in itself, like people going, I'm not telling you what I gave to the local, show society or whatever else. I guess if they're not forthcoming, they're probably not the sort of people you want anyway.
Well, that's right. And we're, rightly or wrongly, we're a very transparent business. I'm a transparent person. I've got an amazing team, both here in Armidale, but also in Bozeman, in Montana. And I think a bit of the reason why our team is so great, we've got some top people, is that they know as much about the business and its performance as I do. We've got quite a discipline around our annual plans, what we call our management rhythm, so our quarterly priorities, our weekly check-ins. We even have, Charlie, a daily stand-up, 15 minutes. It can only be 15 minutes, and it's a stand-up. Who's doing what today? Do you need someone else to help you? Are you waiting on someone? It's only 15 minutes, and it's standing up. It's not allowed to be any more than 15 minutes. But it's
when you say standing up, literally you're standing around.
Standing up in the office. Yeah. If you're in the office, you're standing up. If you're not, you're dialing in.
That's a Vern Harnish thing, isn't it?
That's Vern. That's Jim Collins.
The huddle.
You got it.
Yeah.
Yep. And people just love this rhythm. They love this strategy. And I think why people get really passionate about a business is when you are open and transparent, and we look every quarter, our actuals versus budget, how we're performing as a business, what are some of the metrics we're achieving on the farms. We talk a lot about our bright spots, what we've done well, but we're also talking about what's the brutal facts. Well, this farm here in Queensland, it's going through a terrible drought. Well, how's our people? What are we going to do about that? How's the ecology? So we have a very disciplined system in how we run our business, and then that filtrates into the assets that we manage. So I've just got back on Friday and from our ranches in the US, and we've just had an intense week on strategy and annual planning, quarterly planning, and all the what we call, I talk about metrics, but they're all towards how we measure success. So our MOS, our measures of success, what are they? So, and as a team, we come up with them. I can facilitate the process, but as a team, we need to come up with that balanced scorecard. What are we going to be comfortable with in terms of performance? So I'm really lucky that I get to create, Charlie, these investment and business strategies. The investors, in some cases, or many cases actually, leave it up to us to say, when you've had time, come back to us to what you think the strategy is. You know what, as an investor, what some of our expectations and criteria are. Tell us what the strategy, what our core values are. Tell us our BHAG. Tell us all of those things. Come back to us when you're ready and, let's get on with it. Let's create something really cool. So pretty lucky.
So I mean, were they saying to you, get back to us with that stuff because they've given you that job to try and create, or the other way around?
No. Like we will get from an investor their broad vision and purpose.
Yes.
And then we backfill it and say, okay, I'll get all the team and say, how do we want to play the game? So what are we going to live by? What are our core values? Stay curious, play open-minded, never ever give up. Things like what's next, be the leader, all these sorts of things. And as a team, and then that's how you create culture. So everyone is on the same journey. And these are the sorts of things we check in on and say every quarter, how are we tracking? What's our measures of success? What's the numbers? Let the numbers are the facts. So
let them speak.
Yep.
Let's cover natural capital. I guess so that's sort of I guess it's an internal Impact Ag Partners. You're looking at natural capital, as an asset, or not just here's a property, it's an asset. Like, what are the other parts of that asset that have value? That's what you guys focus on with the assets you're managing. What are some of the things that farmers, they're hearing about natural capital and kind of now know what it means? What are some of the opportunities for someone who's got 2,000 acres down the road here at Ebor to tap into that? Like, what relevance does it have to them?
I think,
depending on the sort of person they are,
of course.
If they're open-minded, going, "Oh, this is interesting. What's it about?"
Yep. I think first things first is you've got to know, and we just talk around a baseline. You've got to know what your starting point is. What have you got today? And if you don't have, biodiversity kind of transects, if you don't have soil tests, if you don't have an understanding of the water coming in, coming out of your asset, you've got to know kind of your starting point, if that makes sense. And if you've got your starting point, then you can, and you can start to build on where you're at. If you don't have data, the data are the facts, it's really hard to make a decision which way you're going to go. So, it's really interesting because in acquiring new assets, we have been pretty dogged about in the due diligence process, Charlie, if this is something that ticks the majority of the boxes, we get in early and we'll test the water. If it's got some irrigation, we'll test all of the soils that are strategic, different land classes. So we kind of come up with some metrics that we can make future predictions on in terms of soil health, plant health, health of the water system, and where are they in their journey?
Are you done it again? It must be Stan.
Mate, your phone's about to die.
I think it might be.
So, for us, and what that does, Charlie, it just helps us understand what the potential upside of an asset is. So we'll go and look at a farm and say, look at these soil tests, look at the soil type, look at the land class, what production system are you going to run, and then say, what sort of upside's left in this asset from a soil point of view? And, because we've got assets now that are delivering, 1% cash yield year on year just from soil carbon. So this is not going to last for long, but in some circumstances we can pay more for an asset than the next door neighbour because we know the carbon value where, everyone's going to get up to speed pretty quick, but just right now.
How do you work that out, unless it's a trade secret? Like, you haven't bought an asset, or are you kind of making some assumptions when you look at it? Or do you literally, before you buy it, go, can I go and test the soil here?
No, that's what I'm saying. We do strategic soil testing prior to purchase.
Yeah, that's all part of your due diligence. Due diligence. Yeah, right.
Yeah, exactly. And that gives us an understanding. We've got enough data within our business now to say, in this soil type, in this climate, in this rainfall, under this production system, that it could sequester X based on, let's say, future rainfall of Y and future production of Y. What sort of carbon could we sequester? And what are some potential biodiversity upsides we can see on this asset? And the team the natural capital team in Impact Ag Partners, they will say, this is the value we see in this asset for the next 15 years. We pile that onto our other financial metrics, and then we can say, righto, we think today we could pay X for this and deliver a future return of Y.
And I would imagine, and I'm not just imagining because I know Stu's talked about it, properties that are attractive for that are the ones that got a pretty low baseline, that have the potential, that have been managed, conventionally, generally. So you kind of go, well, and then obviously testing soil and all the other metrics. That's great, isn't it? Because what do you do when you look at a property? You go, oh, it's got a nice house and rainfall. It's all those sort of very common generic metrics that we use. But that's very smart, Bert.
Well, mate, we have to be where
you keep talking. I'm going to try and unplug my phone into the
Oh, righto.
Yeah, the power show. Yeah, you keep going, mate.
So we have to be. We're responsible for investors' capital, and we take that responsibility very seriously. We are custodians of that capital, and it's up to us, and we're responsible for the performance of that money. So we've got to manage any of the risk associated with that. It's one thing to have a great strategy, but that's got to be in context with risk. And when we get into the later stages of due diligence, we try and make it least subjective as it can be. We let the numbers do the talking, and we now have quite a process and a professional approach to due diligence, and we've got enough data now to know the potential future performance of assets. So in that way, it really de-risks the due diligence process and gives us real confidence on what we can do, and by implementing the right management, So it's working really well. We're really comfortable where we're at, and just really excited to be where we're at and be able to do that. As you would know, in this country, in Australia, land values in agricultural regional areas has really been on a run for the last couple of years. So it's really hard to compete with some of the big end of town. And if you don't have the facts and the data like we do, and have the capacity to say this is what the annual cash yield could be off this asset, from whether it's cereal production, pots production, beef, lamb, wool, whatever, plus there's this other bit of natural capital revenue, what's it going to contribute? Then we can really understand land values.
Well, it just gives you the confidence, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah.
It's as objective assessment as one could actually do.
Yeah, and again, it goes back to the numbers of the facts, and we need to be brutal around numbers. As I said, we take our responsibility of managing other people's capital. We take that seriously, and we respect that, and we only partner with investors that are on a similar journey and are as curious and inquisitive as we are in terms of where this regenerative food and ag production can go. And so we end up, like you, Charlie, with some fantastic relationships with investors globally, and we really respect those relationships.
So talking about globally, you are now, you've got stuff happening in the US. What was it? I mean, I guess there's probably a number of reasons why it's the US, but what do you see over there happening, or the potential, or where's that headed?
Good question. So we're still very new with those investments. They only went through in December. I think not only have I always, had a soft spot for North America, and I'm learning all about the complexities of the US as a nation, the people, the communities, it's like 50 countries in one. But anyway.
Well, each state's pretty much a country. Right?
Mate, it's such an eye-opener. I find it fascinating. But I think from our journey, I've got this deep down somewhere in the back of my head or in my gut, Charlie. I think if Impact Ag Partners is going to have some global impact, I feel like we need to be demonstrating what we can do and what we do best in the Northern Hemisphere. And the reasons I say that is I think I said to you before we went on air, I think Australia is great at piloting and demonstrating and advocating new innovations, new practice change, all of these things. I think we are, Alistair spoke about this yesterday, we are world leaders. I truly believe Australians are. I think to have the global impact that I want to have, I think we have to demonstrate what we're doing in the context of America or somewhere else in the Northern Hemisphere. But for me, I think America, because I think about the complexity of what happens in Washington, and I think about the influence of the environmental groups, the wildlife groups, and those groups are so well funded. Like, there is a lot of money. There's a lot of money in philanthropic ventures to do with conservation, biodiversity, wildlife refuge, you name it. And we need to be able to demonstrate why livestock, in my view, why livestock is so important in landscape management. And if we need to be able to use data and we need to be able to demonstrate performance in those environments where their conservation areas or their wildlife refuge areas, and say, look, these landscapes are better off for having livestock. And there's this other thing that we can talk to you about, which is about drawing down carbon out of the atmosphere and sequestering it in your soils. So one thing I have learned in the US is that land ownership and all of the competing parties, it's very complex. And well, I shouldn't say in the US as a whole, because my core focus has been the state of Montana, but you've got federally owned land, you've got state-owned land, so the state of Montana owned land, that all contribute to the coffers of those jurisdictions, the state government and the federal government. And then you've got conservation areas that are really well funded, as I said, and then you've got wildlife refuges, again, really well funded, and you've got programs that sit on top that say, called these, conservation easements. And conservation easements are pretty much, in layman's terms, you can get paid for making a commitment that you will never develop your land for residential development or other development that's going to change the current state of that land.
The use or the, yeah.
So you would have heard of the Nature Conservancy, like they're a big funder of those. In Montana, we've got the, what do we got? Wildlife, Montana, I've lost it. Anyway, there's another state-based one. Yeah. And there's a multitude of those. I mean, I think WWF would participate, yeah. So
I guess that standing and looking looks like complexity, and it clearly is. But I guess it also represents an opportunity.
Oh, yeah. It's a cool opportunity because if you can think about if I can start and my team over there, we can start demonstrating how agricultural production can be done different. We back it up with data. We sequester some carbon. We reduce emissions on farm. We answer the questions that are all up in the air in the US, and there's that many different competing voices in the US, you can imagine. And I just think if we can let the numbers tell the story, it's a good story.
I guess those agencies or organisations, be them government based or so on, have a budget, and at the moment they're probably shying away from disturbance of cattle in some of those areas. So so I guess the point is, if you guys can say, hey, look what we can do, look what can be done, this is actually going to add a layer of benefit to your whole thing, not so much what's in it for us, but I guess that's an opportunity for them to get better outcomes, spend their budget probably more wisely, depending on what that allocation looks like. But and also just back to the original point about the US versus anywhere else. I mean, I guess what we're doing here, what you're doing, with Impact Ag and what ours doing here and Stu, and I mean a lot of farmers in Australia, it's quite it's quite transferable. Might be out of memory, mate. Bloody thing. Hang on, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do this. Bear with me, team, because I know for a fact there's one video that I can delete off this. And no, Bert, it's not that kind of video. Just bear with me. Actually, I'm going to do that. It's quite translatable to the US, right? I mean, I think you think Europe, it's all, fat cattle and there's three in each paddock. Yep. Compared to the US where we're rangelands and we're doing these things. You go there, mate, I'm going to find this video and get rid of it.
And it has to be, to drive change, it has to be done, as you know, Charlie, in a commercial context. And we've got to be prepared to share our commercial outcomes, whether that's financial, environmental or social. And we think that, we're running 12,000 cows over there and we've got quite a large landscape to manage. And I just feel like if we can demonstrate to all of the parties that are involved over there that if we take on the principles of regenerative agriculture in those climates and we can demonstrate it with data and we can say, hey, here's an alternative to managing wildfire. It's called introduction of livestock. Here's a way of, improving your wetland. It's strategic grazing of livestock. Here's a way of sequestering some carbon. It's called this tool called livestock. I think it's a story that will start to resonate, and then I'd really like to premiumise some of our output in the US to say, here's this beef. It's been produced like this. It's carbon neutral. By the way, we've improved this wetland. By the way, we've done this with water quality. Guess what? We're using less water than what was getting used in the drought 5 years ago. I mean, I think that's the kind of story we need to be telling.
They're all, I guess those things you just referenced, they're all, I guess, measures of success.
They are
environmental,
measures.
financial. Yep. Financial, obviously, I guess the carbon element has a financial outcome, but it's an environmental kind of metric as well, isn't it? There's which again on a balance sheet, whether it's actually there in print or it's sort of assumed with all the numbers, that is building a more resilient business, isn't it?
It is, definitely. And, it's not going to be easy. Different climate. It was minus 17 Celsius there this morning. So that's fresh.
It doesn't even get that cold in Ebor.
No. Minus 10's about the worst it gets here in Ebor. But that was without the wind chill, So, and last week it snowed. We had 3 inches of snow when I was there. So different climate. So that means, sequestration rate's probably not quite as good as here in terms of on a per annum basis. But there's other ways of, when you're working in some brutal environments, there's other ways of having impact. And over there, with some scale, you've only got to move the needle a small way, and you're having a substantial impact.
So there's an overall plan to kind of, step into that as well. How do you get all this? How do you manage all this stuff, Bert? You got a secret?
Yeah, it's called amazing people, robust systems, strong process, discipline. A lot of discipline. I'm not really a process person. When I started Impact Ag, I'll probably skip this bit, but my wife said, "You need psychometric testing." And I said, "What will psychometric testing do?" She said, "She'll tell you where you're really strong and good at and how you can really contribute in business, but she'll also tell you what you're not so great at." And it was one of the best things I've ever done. Because
which version did you use? Because there's quite a few of them.
There is. I can't even remember, Charlie, what it was. I've done a couple of those, since. I've done a couple of those since. But this one that we did was quite in depth, and we actually had someone interpret it. And then I had a business coach at the time, and she was driving this as well. And it was like, okay, this is how you operate. To round out the diversity you need in the business you're talking about building here, you need a person that's like this, and you need a person that's like that, and so that's kind of in the early days. That's how we kind of build a team. And so I'm going back. I'm not really a process person, so I build teams that will help complement some of my skills, but also the skills we're going to need in the future, because this is about, for us, technology, data, natural resources. So we've got, environmental managers, we've got rural science background people, we've got natural resources, we've got ecologists, we've got economists, we've got ex-accountants, so rounded, diverse team.
Mate, I'm just looking at the time. We might wrap this up, but I do want to just do another 10, 15 minutes, if that's all right, Bert, for our Patreon members, which is our lovely people who think it's good value to slip us the 2 coffees a month kind of equivalent to get transcripts, you're the bonus content for one of the episodes. This is the when they get. So it's free to those guys. It's only available to Patreon members. So anyone who wants to sign up and as I was saying to Bart before, it's like, what will Bert say next? Well, you have to be a Patreon member to find out.
Oh, well, is that a carrot or a stick?
I think it's a bonus, and certainly with Bart, you never know quite what he's going to say next. It was quite the bait for him. So, mate, we're going to wrap it up here. I've got a few more for you for then, and I could have chatted for another half an hour. But just on this, and we have got some more questions there. So, mate, I really appreciate your time. I've learned a hell of a lot just sitting here listening as well, not just sort of kind of thinking, where does this all end up in the ears of my listeners? And obviously your regenerative journey will continue till, that you are in that pine box. I trust it will. But this is an ever evolving space, isn't it? That there's, which is a good thing. It's dynamic, and it's, and you're part of it. That's awesome,
mate. Yeah, and we're constantly learning. We're learning all the time, and you got to stay curious, and you got to stay open minded. And I think you said yesterday, 2 ears, 1 mouth, and for us, you got to be 2 ears, 1 mouth. Read a lot. Look for leaders that you aspire to be, and you've got to work hard. Work hard, and it's a commitment, and balance. Like I said, the currency of time, as you know, as you have a young family, getting those balance right, really important. I mean, if you can easily blow the ship up if you're not managing time. So.
And that was, there's no doubt there's a theme. Bart brought it up this morning because his wife is good at tapping him on the shoulder when that's out of balance. And I think all wives generally are, aren't they? So God bless them. Right, mate, let's go wrap it up. We're going to do the Patreon thing in a minute. We'll and then as the rain tumbles down, I'm glad that Stan's removed his nag from the fence by now. I actually was thinking, is there a knife in the drawer there that if it does take off, I can cut that rope? I know there's some scissors in there. I used them earlier on. Right, mate, let's wrap it up. we'll get back to the next bit.
Thanks, Charlie.
And next week on the Regenerative Journey is an interview that I'd taken some time to track down the guest of, being Angelica Arnott, my beautiful, wonderful wife. On a rainy day here at Hanamino, we sat trying to avoid the rain on the tin roof and explored her own regenerative journey, which I have to say is wonderful. And I hope you enjoy the interview and listening to it as much as I did recording it. Next week on the Regenerative Journey.
This podcast is produced by Rhys Jones at Jaeger Media. If you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to subscribe, share, rate and review. For more episode information, please head over to www.charliearnott.com.au.